Persia, a land of barren mountain and burning desert, a harsh land in which the climate is sparing in its bounties. An ancient land, which is the meeting point between East and West, between Russia and India, between Arabia and the Caspian Sea. Iranians call it Iran, their soft and musical language, Persian. On the rim of the country's dead heart, the old enemy, sand, sand, sand. There flowered, under its powder blue skies, a wonder in the story of mankind. Beautiful women, in a land blessed to this day with beautiful women, inspired the miniature painter's brushes. Women with silvery voices and melting eyes. Eyes like the eyes of the gazelle, which leaps over the tarnished gold of the mountainsides. Over the centuries grew palaces and mosques, which still dazzle the eye. In Persian gardens scented with jasmine, the lotus flowers bloomed, and the nightingales serenaded lovers to their dreamlands. Persia was the inspiration of Omar Khayyam and the 1001 Nights. In later centuries, conquerors trampled on its heritage. But through golden ages, the spirit of Persia has always triumphed. In this world of beauty was born, more than 5 centuries before Christ, the mightiest empire in the then history of the world. The first capital was here, in Pasargad. In celebration of 2,500 years of nationhood, the Persian people, led by their Shah, His Imperial Majesty Mohammed Reza Pahlavi Aryamer Shah, make homage at the tomb of Cyrus the Great, the first Shah of all. Cyrus, King of Kings, champion, long before Magna Carta, of human rights and liberties. Cyrus, the Lord's anointed of the prophet Isaiah in the Old Testament. Cyrus, the founder of Persian culture and the father of Iran, the land, 5 times the size of Great Britain, which this Shah rules today. In solemnly dedicating himself to the memory of his predecessor, the Shah was keeping a promise he had made 10 years earlier. As he left the tomb to join his empress and his 10-year-old son, the crown prince, he was filled with a sense of occasion. It had fallen to him, after a twilight in his nation's long history, to remind the world and his own people of Persian pride.
کوروش شاه بزرگ، شاه شاهان، شاه هخامنشی، شاه ایران زمین، از جانب من شاهنشاه ایران و از جانب ملت من
O Cyrus, great king, king of kings, Achaemenian king, king of the land of Iran, I, the Shah and Shah of Iran, offer thee salutations from myself and from my nation. At this glorious moment in the history of Iran, I and all Iranians, the offspring of the empire which thou founded 2,500 years ago, bow our heads in reverence before thy tomb. We cherish thy undying memory.
پاس می‌داریم.
In the middle of October 1971, 62 heads of state, or their direct representatives, converged on the airport of the fairy tale city of Shiraz, set in the desert beside the Persian Gulf. In a patchwork of color, in a whirl of salutes, bows and curtsies, familiar faces in the world scene stepped out of their aircraft over red carpets fringed with guards of honor into the welcoming Persian sunlight. It was just like this. Too much was happening to pick out the detail. For all the arrivals, ceremony and protocol had to be carefully observed. None who were there saw it all. So began one of the most historic cultural gatherings the world has ever seen. The flags of the guest nations flew in salute as the VIPs flew in. This was no party of the year. It was the celebration of 25 centuries. after day, escorted cars drove out through Shiraz into the desert towards the ruined palace of the great kings of antiquity, the historic birthplace of the Persian Empire. The guests were traveling to a reception without precedent, even in the days of Cyrus the Great. Their camp, if you can call it a camp, was shaped like a star with 5 wings branching out from the royal pavilion to represent the 5 continents. Each head of state had an apartment with a sitting room, 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and a service room with an electric stove and ironing board for their entourage. The Shah had personally supervised all the preparations. In sight of the ruins of the great palace of his predecessors, which had taken 187 years to build, the complex of new building was a major piece of construction, even for modern times. One day, it is thought that it might become a super hotel for wealthy tourists. The great hand weavers of Persian carpets had been using their uncanny skill to make portraits in silk of each of the distinguished guests. The portraits were to be hung in their sitting rooms. As the famous men and women matched their pictures with their presents, they were given an excited greeting. Persia was in gala mood. The villagers had heard on radio and television that the great people of the world were coming to honor their country. A country which had ruled in the past what was the then known Earth. A country which, after centuries of apathy, their Shah was determined to lead into the 20th century. He began by inviting the world to stop, look, and listen. The modern world had half forgotten Persia's place on the map. The best beginning for the future was to sound the trumpets and recall the Persian people to the glories of their own past. What happened was assuredly unforgettable. Throughout the day and into the night, the Shah was in constant attendance on the newly arriving guests. His hand, for 100 times, was stretched in welcome. Looking at these scenes, a poker player might well reflect that here is that rare hand in cards, which is called a royal flush. Leaders, whom we all recognize, had a unique opportunity for relaxed conversation. Well, perhaps not now with the TV cameras looking on, but others were talking elsewhere. An international congress of 250 scholars were already in session at Shiraz. The papers they read on Persian culture were to be published and circulated to research institutes throughout the world. Such a brain's trust of Persian study had never been collected before. In Shiraz, where there is a garden appropriately named Garden of Paradise, the lights twinkled like diamonds, like the bubbles in a glass of champagne. It is not often that a state occasion like this has been shown to the world. Not often, if ever, that so many leaders of state have been gathered together simply to honor an anniversary in the history of a civilization. In the state reception room of the Royal Pavilion in Persepolis move people who influence the destiny of mankind. The order of precedence, the etiquette of who sits where and who leads who to dinner call for all the skills of diplomacy. Your Majesties, honorable presidents of republics, highnesses, eminences, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The Shah was proposing the toast of his guests. Look at some of them. In our gathering this evening, past history is linked with the realities of today. Such a bond of past and present, achieved by understanding and friendship, is surely an omen of good.
بدین جهت بود که موضوع این دعوت را شایسته آن می‌دانستیم که شما رنج این سفر را بر خود هموار کنید.
On the following evening, the guests moved out into the star-spangled Persian night toward Persepolis, the ruined palace of Cyrus's successor, Darius, and his son Xerxes. Alexander the Great, the conqueror who reduced it to a shell, is said to have needed 10,000 mules and 6,000 camels to remove the treasures which were housed in the precincts. The climax for the royal guests was a saint-lumière among the great stones where it all happened. From the tomb in the mountainside overlooking the palace where he ruled 500 years before Christ, the voice of Darius the Great speaks again.
Open! Open the gates guarded by winged bulls with human heads.
Now comes the procession of the ambassadors, their beards in ringlets, their hair curled. A long procession towards the stairways of stone and black marble, guarded by the lancers of our royal guard, the 10,000 immortals. The long train of the horsemen from the steppes and the Arab camel drivers moving toward the tall forest of stone columns that reach to the sky in a gesture of prayer.
The Ionians and the Aeolians, living on land and sea, bring you their rams and amber chalices.
reconquered Cyprus and the Greek colonies of Asia, I too left them all their liberties. Ahura Mazda has deigned, through the words of my mouth, to allow his image to cohabit with those of the Greek gods on coins.
Long ago, the ancient Persians invented the postal system with relays of horsemen bringing news from the distant outposts of empire. Today, in the company of his guests, in the long shadow of the ruins of Persepolis, messengers of good omen bring the Shah the greetings of his Senate in Tehran.
در این روز بزرگ تاریخ ایران از تخت جمشید زادگاه شاهنشاه
Today we submit to history the account of the past 2,500 years, and we firmly believe that the balance is proudly to our credit.
الهام بخش همه مردم روی زمین در ادامه راه آنان به سوی نیکبختی واقعی جامعه بشری باشد.
Persia is on parade, a parade of the great warriors of Persian history, led by the prehistoric men in skins who were the first of all. Here are the war chariots of the Achaemenian kings who conquered and civilized the ancient world, whose trumpets were a call of peace. These were the Persian infantry with wicker shields sons of Cyrus and Darius, who ruled so many peoples, but awarded them all the rights of free men. There were no slaves in the Persian Empire. For more than 10 years, archaeological experts studying the records which remain pieced together how the old warriors must have looked. No stirrups for the cavalry. Stirrups were invented centuries later. Every historic detail in this parade, so far as we can know today, is exact. This wooden fortress, pulled by a span of oxen, was one of the first siege weapons. In these frail oared boats, armies whose soldiers and wagon train was said to have stretched 28 miles crossed the Mediterranean. Over the centuries, through dynasties that have spread long before Christ of modern times, Persia has prevailed. Conquerors from the time of Alexander have adopted Persian ways. The spirit of the country has risen again and again. The trumpets have never ceased sounding. During the next 500 years, years in which the Great Wall of China was built, in which Hannibal crossed the Alps and Julius Caesar conquered Gaul, these were the Parthian soldiers of the Arsacid dynasty. Sasanians, with their sugarloaf hats, which are still worn in Persia today, followed during the centuries when Muhammad founded Islam. and the powers of ancient Rome sank into final decline. The Safavids ruled Persia in the age when Charlemagne was crowned the Holy Roman Emperor in 800 AD. The Dialmites were contemporaries of William the Conqueror, the Battle of Hastings, 1066, and all that. Columbus was discovering America when the Safavids were on the march. The Afsharids were a short-lived dynasty in Persian terms, who belonged to the time when Bonnie Prince Charlie raised the flag of the Stuart Rebellion in Scotland. The Afsharids mounted muskets on swivels on their camels. The Zans, although they can scarcely have heard about it, fought their battles at the time of the Declaration of American Independence. The style of their uniforms shows that the Qajars belonged to the Napoleonic era. The armed services of the latest of the present dynasty in Persia, the Pahlavi, gather for a grand assembly. The world is looking on. These are the household troops of the Shah. Here is the new army which the Shah has created to develop literacy, health, and international development. A peace army to fight poverty, hunger, and social injustice. A great international cause in which Persia wishes to play her part. The fountains, which inspired the poets, philosophers, and thinkers of this old land centuries ago, whisper their watery music. As the flags drift in the evening breeze, after the formalities of the state reception, the Shah and his Empress invite his guests to a traditional Persian party. The way it works is that he doesn't sit down himself. Moving among his guests, he makes them all happy. The music and the food are traditional. It wouldn't have been complete without the dancing girls. It could have been the first occasion in most of the VIPs' lives that so many of them, who are normally whisked about in plush limousines, have crowded into coaches. But what coaches? They were carrying them from the pavilions at Persepolis to the airport at Shiraz, then by air to Tehran, the modern capital of Persia. Just in case they were still hungry, confections were served on the way. In the aircraft, the Shah had brief moments in which he was on his own, with time to look at what they were saying about the celebrations in the newspapers. From a headquarters in Persepolis, the press was tapping and typing comments to the world. For most of them, it was a surprise to discover how the new Persia was evolving. They only remembered the old, when Persia had slept. The organization of the Great Parade was in itself an eye-opener. The celebrations were the signal that the flame of Persia was burning again. Great nations come and go. A century ago, Persia had been of no importance except to historians, romanticists, and students of archaeology. Look at her now. She is making her challenge to join the new world. Her greatest enemy is illiteracy. She has started to beat it by building 4,000 new schools in a year, schools for adults as well as children. Her other enemy is her scarcity of water. By building great dams, Persia's water, too, is being brought under control. She is moving fast into heavy industry. The country has to do a lot yet to catch up industrially with the Western world. But one of the wonders of her is that this old sleeping beauty is now awake. So much is happening so quickly. Her modern spirit was first aroused during the reign of the present Shah's father. During the celebrations of the 2500th anniversary, his son remembered him. In Tehran, the cavalcade of cars swept towards the mausoleum of Reza Shah the Great. His son wished to do honor to the memory of his father. The ceremony was solemn and short. Most of us would wish to pay our own respects to our own fathers. His own had founded a new dynasty in Persia. The Persian people already call him Reza the Great. After that, the climax of the celebrations. The first glimpse of the floodlit monument outside the airport of Tehran in honor of the present Shah. Below the monument is a museum of Persian art and a cinema. To open it? Well, what would you expect? On the last day of the celebrations, there was a spectacular to mark the inauguration of a vast new sports stadium in Tehran designed to seat 100,000 people. As the Shah arrived, they seemed to be all there. Swinging heavy clubs is a traditional sport. The strong men of Persia pride themselves on their muscular development. Notice that the soldiers are doing their arms drill without orders, to the music of the Viennese waltz. Towards the end of the celebrations, the Shah heard an address from the religious representatives of the world, a confirmation that religious tolerance should be extended to all men. Not all countries accept it. In ancient tradition, Persia does. As the VIPs said their goodbyes, they left behind them, each in their own language and over their own famous names, a message of goodwill. In our world, we might call them bread and butter letters. In Persia's world, they remember the words of their great poet and thinker, Sadi, who 700 years ago wrote, "If ambitious of a great name, make a practice of munificence, for the crop will not shoot till thou shalt sow the seed." Tehran, the new monument is likely to become as familiar as London's Big Ben, the Eiffel Tower of Paris, and New York's Statue of Liberty.
Symbole des grandes fêtes de l'Iran, ce cylindre en argile cuite de Cyrus proclame que c'est ici que pour la première fois les droits de l'homme devinrent loi.